We're back here on our program, Jones and Company, and we're talking about the labor movement in our country today. Obie Ferguson is the president of the TUC, who is here, and we are joined by Sloan Smith, who's been on our program on numerous occasions, and we always have a good time when you're here.
I think we do.
Yes, absolutely. You are the vice president of the TUC.
Correct.
All right, and president of the Customs.
Bahamas Customs, Immigration,
Allied Workers Union.
Yes.
And customs officers are happy, yes?
I really don't think so.
Again?
I'm not so sure it's again as much as it is. There's certain things they were expecting.
Okay.
And the government, obviously through COVID, had to suspend promotion in their case, and consequently promised that, I think in January of next year, they should be able to proceed with the promotion exercise. So I think that has caused great consternation in the customs camp. That having been said, there are other major issues, certainly for our union. For instance, we gave the government a proposal, a contract extension proposal. And so we're waiting on the government to at least let's sit and discuss that. We've spoken to Minister Renzel Roll, and he promised to get back to us very soon with the intent of trying to bring closure to that.
And, I mentioned on a radio program with you gentlemen that having regard to COVID-19 and the state of the economy of the Bahamas, that the unions should not expect salary increases, that type thing, right? I think Mr. Ferguson at the time said that salary increases can be deferred. But I want to speak to Mr. Ferguson about that, because I thought about that overnight, Mr. Ferguson. Because if you defer a salary increase, you still owe the person what you have agreed to. And given the circumstances in which the country finds itself, you're going to be hard pressed to pay those deferred salary increases.
Yes. The deferred salary would be, even the agreements, I would recommend that the union and the government and the employers, whoever they are, enter into a meaningful negotiation with the union. But the union would be willing, at least some of them would be willing to defer what was agreed. Defer it until things improve and the economy can absorb it. But I don't think it should interfere with them negotiating, because I don't think any union would say they would enforce or they would seek to enforce the increase at this particular time. And this is one of the things, Mr. Jones, they never give us credit as leaders. They think we're insensitive, we live someplace other than the Bahamas. But we know the state of the economy. They say we're losing $1.3 billion deficit or whatever. It's quite a bit. And the union would negotiate. I suggest that. They negotiate, reach the agreement, and agree to a date with the government, depending on the economy, of course, when they would begin to pay those amounts that's been agreed to.
But shouldn't all unions, given the pandemic that we have experienced, forego any salary increase for another year or two?
Yeah, and as in effect what I'm saying.
I'm saying forego it, not defer it.
Oh, no.
Forego it.
You can't forego it.
Why?
But you can defer it, because you want to show that we have an appreciation as to the state of the economy, because the dollar is very important for us as Bahamians. If you tell a Bahamian tomorrow that the dollar isn't worth a dollar, you're going to have a problem. But you're part of that as well, because you're part of the economy. So we want to make sure that dollar remain equivalent to, or at least perceived to be on par with that of the U.S. So I don't think there's a trade union leader who will not agree for a deferred payment. But they are committed to sit down and negotiate a proper industrial agreement. And those terms, they will defer it to a later date. I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, but Mr. Ferguson, with respect to the public service, and Sloan is with the Customs and Immigration people, they would know that we've been running huge deficits every year for the last decade or more. And the government projects a $1.3 billion deficit for the fiscal year.
Yeah.
So which means that next year, May, they're going to borrow around $1 billion plus to cover a deficit.
Yeah.
Why should any reasonable union, Mr. Smith, expect any financial increase or remuneration from the government of the Bahamas?
I try to break things down into compartments that I can understand. In my home, there are revenue streams. And those revenue streams allow me, even if I don't have the resources presently, to go and borrow. So if the government is going to borrow 1 point whatever billion to meet its obligations, it tells me they still have maybe in reserve the type of finances that give them the ability to pay its obligations. We support the government in its effort to defer payments, to defer promotions, because we know they're good for it, they're going to pay. And so no trade unions, I believe, will say to forego salaries and benefits, because we know they can pay.
But they've shown that you cannot pay.
No, presently they can't
They've
pay.
shown you that the national debt is out of whack.
You can always have a debt. But we also know the capacity of the government's revenue machinery, whether it's customs, whether it's road traffic, whether it's the immigration fees, whether it's the tax fees, whether it's the people going out on those planes and aircrafts. Those funds keep coming in. Hence, we know the government is about to certainly open the economy. Those revenue streams continue. And so obligations, when people have worked and they deserve to be compensated for the work they do, those are reasonable expenditures that any government, I'm sure you'd agree, should anticipate.
No, I don't agree, because I know that the government has been borrowing to pay public servants. And they borrow every single month.
Yeah, but we understand that too. But then if you want
But
to go into another area, we could go into another discussion
Yes.
on what could be done possibly to deal with the huge salaries and what have you.
The bloated civil service.
But who bloats the public service? From government to government. Mr. Jones, I submit.
From one administration to the next.
Yes, I submit. As a part of maybe rewarding people, I would prefer to believe that it's through attrition. Well, we got 700 people leave the service today, so we're going to bring on 500 people. If they leave at the higher end and their salaries are like 50, 60, 70,000, we probably could double that by 4 and replenish the service. But again, we need the government, and the government ought to determine what causes the public service to run effectively. It doesn't matter which ministry, which department. If we begin that process, then we can probably shrink the public service. But until government takes that position, we are hamstrung with their hiring practices and the amount of money they have to dole out. So when we talk about whether people should be paid because the service is too big, well, who's to blame for that? Isn't it the government themselves?
Yes, but the government...
let me say this.
Yes.
I had a conversation with Minister Brenzel-Roll a few weeks ago now. And he said, Mr. Smith, Mr. President, we're about to hire some people in immigration, some people in the police, and some people in customs. I said, well, for what reason? He said, Sloan, that's the explanation they gave me. We need more people on the streets. I am an immigration officer with 34 years experience, and I'm telling you, looking at the staff that we doubled in the past 3 years, we doubled the staff of immigration. And you're telling me we need more staff in immigration? Utter nonsense. Okay. It's about how you manage your resources. In '86, when I joined the immigration department, they placed me in the airport. It was about 9 of us, clearing more than, 4.5 million people, or maybe 5 million, the bulk of which came through that airport. How many people do you think on the airport presently? To clear that same 5 million people, we have about 50 to 100 officers rotating around that airport to clear them same people. So obviously you don't have the high amount of output. With that numbers, you're going to get smaller amount. You're not even getting equilibrium. So what are we doing? If any government wishes to make a change, they can, But most governments, what are they concerned about? In 5 years, I need to get back in. So I'm going to send some people to this place. I'm going to send some people to that place. And that brings a whole litany of issues. of which we are still suffering from today.
So you are saying, Mrs. Smith, that the government has been fiscally irresponsible.
Successive governments do it. It doesn't even, let's look at after an election what happens. Persons who've been out of the service, who've been out of professions, all of a sudden they get these contracts, right? These huge contracts to come into organizations and to pretty much carry out, I guess, the will that maybe they're placed there to do. But the reality is, Mr. Jones, instead of giving those huge contracts, really, that's about 4 jobs at the low end. If you look at the uniform branches, about 18,000 is 1 job. But you give somebody a contract for 60,000, I want you to think about how many people you could really hire who really need it at the low end. But government really is largely responsible for it.
We have seen during COVID-19, gentlemen, that many of these organizations, the public sector as well as the private sector, can do with less people.
Yeah.
All right? And given the technological advances in our country, the technology at our disposal, we can do with less people.
Of course.
The government says that it's not going to lay off anyone. Based on what you are saying, Mr. Smith, that is an irresponsible position. Mr. Ferguson, you agree with that?
Well, what I can say, I don't understand the rationale, but the government is the government, and I suspect they know where the source of revenue is coming from, and I suspect the production that they expect from each one of those workers are in place. I mean, if they have a certain budget for it, and if those workers are performing, their performance will more than justify their continuance, in my humble view. Because production, it has a direct relationship to profitability. If you're being productive as a worker, you know, and talking about that over the COVID thing, I work a couple hours in my office. And quite frankly, I found that I was able to do more work in my office during that period. And now I just finished with two case management a day by way of the Zooming situation, which I get to learn. And I get to like it. I told the judge, I think I'm enjoying this.
Yes.
Save me from having to go all the way to court and do all this type of nonsense. So it's gonna change the way we do things. There's no question about that. It's gonna have a serious impact on the workforce.
On the workforce,
No
the
question
number of
about that.
people that you hire,
No question.
and the level of productivity.
Exactly.
And while we are at it, let's talk about productivity, because unions don't talk too much about productivity. And the expectation of union leaders, of workers in the country.
Well, I can tell you, Mr. Jones, if you were involved in our discussion, which I'm certain you will see the end result, we play a very heavy focus on productivity. That's going to be people like Mr. Lightbourne and those who are educators, and Sloan with customs and immigration, and the doctors, but you know they're doing a fantastic job in my view. Mancha were there with those nurses. I mean, look, productivity must be the thing. Those doctors are working, even though they're being denied their monies. They are full force every day at the front line, trying to deal with the situation, despite the fact that they have not been paid, despite the fact that their matters were sent to a court that don't have the authority. They could take an attitude and say, look, I'm not going to perform. That's not their position. As a matter of fact, Freddie mentioned yesterday, they have a practice in their profession. No matter what the situation is, they got to go and perform and be on that front line and do what is required. So
The Hippocratic Oath.
the Hippocratic Oath. And they are carrying that out to the letter. So, Mr. Jones, I want people to realize that those nurses and those doctors, they're second to none. They're second to none. And luckily for me, and the TUC, all of the medical grouping is with us. So we have a close bond. We know exactly what's going on. We have Dr. Butler Pinder, who takes care of the senior doctors. She's the president of the senior doctors body. I mean, performance is second to none.
I'll speak to the level of representation they got from the TUC over the last year, because the senior doctors, they went on strike.
Yes.
The junior doctors went on strike.
I was a part of that.
Yes, you were part of that. You organized that, I understand. The nurses, they had their issues. The last year, since the last Labor Day to this one, it has been a tumultuous time for the TUC.
Yes, but we have been successful in.
Have you really been successful?
In
They
completing.
haven't been paid.
The junior doctors have not been paid. The nurses have not been paid. But the senior doctors have completed an industrial agreement, and to my knowledge, up to that point, they were all paid.
Okay.
Yeah, so you know, but I'm making the point that even though the junior doctors weren't paid, and so is the nurses, Manshira is out there with those people, I mean, taking all kind of chances. I said, what do you do when you go home? Before she have to deal with her kids, you know, typical kids, when their mommy come home, or their dad, they rush to them and they hug them. She can't do that. She had to go change, take all that off, have a bath, and so on, before she can deal with her kids. That's a commitment. That's a real serious commitment. And I want to show the people that these nurses and doctors are doing an exceptional job to try to make sure people like me and you and others can be around. So I don't know why they're not paying them. I mean, I can't do it now. I accept that. I agree with that. But they should have done so. The midwives, they owe the midwives, right? Why wouldn't you pay them? Because if the foreigners come in to work, you pay them.
Why did the matter go to court?
Every matter went to court.
No, I'm talking about for the junior doctors.
Yes.
Why?
We went there because they refused to pay. We gone there. The judge said that their matter could be dealt with by the tribunal court. The tribunal makes a ruling that they have no jurisdiction, they have no authority to deal with those matters. See? And that's the reason why I'm saying it's confusing.
So the Supreme Court
Yes.
told you
Yes.
that the matter should go to the tribunal.
And
the tribunal told you they have no jurisdiction.
they have no jurisdiction.
And so it should go back to the Supreme Court.
Well, you got to go back to the Supreme Court. You got to go now to the Court of Appeal.
Court of Appeal.
Yes. See, and that's what's so wrong with the system. Everybody, the Minister of Labor and Director of Labor and those, right? If there's anything they should be doing, it's trying to make the system work. But what happened to the doctors now? Their matter is now in front of the tribunal. The tribunal said we have no authority to impose terms and conditions on an employer. That's their ruling. So when you say, the public say, oh, well, the matter went to the court, the matter did not.
Mr. Ferguson, it sounds to me, Mrs. Smith, that the systems we have, I talk about systems failure all the time on these programs.
Anti-worker.
We have some systemic problems in our country, yes?
Yes.
If I may, right?
Yes.
Mr. Jones, any law, and Mr. Ferguson can correct me, any law that contradicts itself, obviously those has to be dealt with, right? I'm not so sure that there's any existing law that pits management and workers against each other, because all governed by the same thing, same statutes. They all line up to do certain things for tranquility in the work environment. The problem we have, and we will continue to have until time is done, is the condition of the human heart. You have excellent structure in terms of the law to apply where it needs to be applied to deal with whatever issues need to be done. But the problem we run into is those who sit in leadership, who make the calls and the decision, it is what drives them. It's why you could ask the question, what would motivate a person who is a minister to side with an employer at a privy council? Mr. Ferguson just mentioned this earlier. To side with that employer against 600 people. What motivates that person, Mr. Jones? It isn't nothing wrong with the laws, you know. It's the people who are tasked to abide by them and to show the greatest degree of support for the law. The law is about structure and keeping us out of problems. When we can solve the issue of the human heart, we could deal with the issues we have. And I submit you're never going to have it, but what it is not an excuse for is for us not as leaders to do what we should do. Certainly those in government, if there's a law saying pay the people when they work, in the case of the doctors, when they work overtime, pay them. That's a law. Everybody knows, for anybody, when they work holidays, you get paid. But for heaven's sakes, the people who are tasked with making sure the law runs, who have a whole AG's office, who rely on that, they ought to be the very first person saying, you know what? That's what the law says, man. It does not matter how I feel about it. And that feeling comes from someone or persons who feel it shouldn't be done for certain people.
But I thought
and the point simply is this. The structure exists. It works.
I thought
It's
that there
people.
was agreement, universal agreement, that doctors should be paid for holiday pay. Wasn't that agreed?
But just agreement. That's what the law says.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, but they're not honoring it.
And they're not, not honoring
They're not
it.
honoring it.
So therein is our problem. There is no disconnect between labor and the employer per se by law, because the same law that gives provisions for the creation of unions give provisions for the creation of employers' unions. So it boils down to whether we as a people want to move away from something that pulls us all down, and that is lust of the eye, lust of the flesh, and pride of life. Oftentimes, some people look at other people and say they are not like us. We are better than them, and that shouldn't be given to them. But there's a simple biblical principle that says, when the power is in your hand to do good, do it. Most people don't feel in leadership that there's a penalty coming to them. It's more arrogance than anything. The penalty will come.
Could it be, Mr. Ferguson, that the political directorate interferes or apparently is involved in the micromanagement of the public service to the detriment of the workers of the country? You have in the Ministry of Labor people who were formerly trade unionists, who would know the labor laws. Right. In the case of the current director of labor.
Yes.
If he knows labor laws, why aren't these laws, these regulations, being followed? Could it be that there is the interference of the political directorate in the normal flow of things?
That's very possible. As a matter of fact, today, I was driving back to my office, and I heard the director answering that very same question. People ask him. He said, well, he now has to take directives now from, in effect, the politicians. So even though he may know better, he is acquiescing to the authority of his superiors.
So the trade union movement is poorly served by those people who are public servants.
Yes, they take instructions. It doesn't matter. I go to court with the government all the time. They do a very bad job in the courts. But they are given instructions to proceed with the case, even though on the basis of it, there's no way they can succeed. They did get instructions to go and fight it. That cannot be the norm for good industrial relations. It can't be. Good industrial relations means I call Mr. Jones, I say, Mr. Jones, I have an issue, man, here with so-and-so. We meet, we talk, we find a way of...
It calls for compromise.
Yes, that's what it's all about. But this thing about, I'm in charge, I'm the minister, and I'm going to do it my way. If you don't like it, you go do the next thing. It's like I had one employer, Mr. Jones, they ordered worker $500 for vacation. I said, look, man, if you can't pay all the vacation one time, why don't you give her $100 here, give her $50 here, give her $75, I'll give her a schedule. He said, no, man, I want to go to court. So he goes to court. He had up about $15,000 worth of legal fees. It just doesn't make sense. You are entitled. The Act says pay for overtime. Simple. If you can't pay all, you're an employer. You're not always in a position to pay all. But sit down and avoid having this confrontation that doesn't make no sense to me at all. So, Mr. Jones, yeah. Even though you qualify, just like a lawyer in the AG office, as you can see, they've lost a lot of cases, right? I'm certain somebody told them that case, don't win it. But somebody decided, fight that no matter what. And they go to court and they lose, and it costs them hundreds and 200, 400,000. I saw a bill for one situation, it's over $900,000 legal fees. Shouldn't they put it in, shouldn't they then say?
And the taxpayers pay for that.
Yes, well, why wouldn't they give it to the working people, the average man?
But Mr.
It's incredible, it's just incredible.
Mr. Jones, one of the things, I'm not so sure it's always the politician necessarily creating that problem by just calling into a ministry and saying, do this. Have you ever considered that when you put somebody who's a fish out of water into an environment, but you have other technocrats who've been there for ages who are looking for that opportunity, and you just take somebody and dump them there, then all of a sudden you have somebody who really doesn't know anything. It's not that they may not be intelligent and what have you, but in that particular discipline, they're novice. So these people here, who should have probably ascended there and be able to give guidance when stuff come before it and say, listen, this is what it ought to be. Minister, I know what you're saying, but let me show you what the law says. This is the approach. This saves us unnecessary litigation. It gives the people what they have, and then it gets rid of all this backlog that we always have. That is the approach. Listen, I've seen that in the immigration department. We've written to the government previously, and we've simply said, consider sourcing your directorate from within. Why? Because you have career officers who are learned, who are technocrats, who can handle those positions. But when you constantly bring somebody from outside and they don't really know it, then invariably you hear the talk. Immigration is headless. That's the talk I hear. It's headless, it's running, but it's headless. Who's running it? It can't be the leader because they really don't know it. And it's unfortunate that that's what leads to some of the issues you have in an organization. We've said to the government, in fact, met Honorable Prime Minister, most Honorable Prime Minister down in Barbados at a cocktail function, and we simply said, that's something you need to consider. Realign this thing so that the right leaders are sitting there running the immigration department. The right leaders are there running the labor department. It gets rid of a lot of unnecessary foolishness. It costs the government less money to do that than it costs to have somebody carry the court over somebody who really doesn't know. And then, of course, who end up paying? That's all us. They taxing us more.
Yeah. Mr. Ferguson, yes. Obviously you had a message for the labor movement, and I know you had a lengthy message. I don't want you to read it, all right? I just want you to say succinctly, what are you doing to inspire the workers in this period of COVID-19 for the year ahead?
Well, Mr. Jones, just let me say, take 3 lines of it, where I said that we cannot worship God as we used to. We cannot go to school as we used to. We cannot celebrate our most cherished Labor Day, which was established and celebrated since 1962. Together, we cannot socialize as we used to. We cannot attend funerals and marriage ceremonies as we used to. And there are thousands of workers today without a job, which will continue in the foreseeable future. So what I want to say, without reading this whole dissertation, things have changed. Things will not be the same anymore. And I will invite the workers of this country to respond to the questionnaire that was put out by Zane and the grouping from the study group that we have going, to give them the information so we can develop systems, curriculums designed to position them post-COVID-19. I want to make that point very clear because things are going to change completely. And through education, Mr. Jones, we can adjust, but it's a major, major adjustment. You have family members who die, you can't even go. You go to the church, they threaten you, you got to be a certain number. So you go to church, instead of concentrating on the pastor, you're looking at the door to see if a police officer is going to come to take you out. So you're not even concentrating on the preaching. And even if you're watching it by YouTube or whatever they call it, you're still looking to see if a police is going to come in. If the pastor go beyond 1 hour, you say he's been there for 1 hour. He's only supposed to be there 1 hour. He goes an hour and a half. You know, you change your whole mindset. So I would say that I want to take this opportunity to invite all working people, all non-working people, to provide that information. And I think Zane and his grouping ought to be commended. Mr. Jones, when you see it, I'm certain you'll be very proud of it, by Dr. Hogg and Professor Hogg and those. You'll be proud to see the caliber of Bahamians we have, and somehow we just disregard them. So yes, this is where I think we need to go. They're going to assist us in doing that, and I would like to see us be in a positive position to look and see how we can benefit from the fallout from COVID-19.
And so you're retraining workers in the country to cope with post-COVID-19.
Yes, that's precisely what we're doing, because like I say, you know, if you look, I think Fredman has mentioned this, if you look at the tourism industry, Mr. Jones, and I look at the Act, I don't know if you're familiar with the Act, but I'm going to email you a copy of it. What it provides for port of entry, you only have 2 port of entry, recognized port of entry. That's Freeport and Nassau. And that's where we pay the departure tax. But we go in the air and we say we had 7 million visitors. But when you really look at it, are they paying departure tax for those keys? I guarantee you'll find roughly about 3 million of those people don't come to the Bahamas, you know.
Don't come to New Providence.
Don't come to New Providence. But do we get
the revenue?
That's my point.
Yeah.
See, that's the kind of thing we have now been able to research. And we made a suggestion that we'd make suggestions to the Prime Minister. He talked about new revenue stream. That's certainly one of those areas we can look at. See? So the one last point I want to make on the ships. When the ships come in, Mr. Jones, I'm certain you traveled extensively. I went through the Caribbean. I go down to Cayman Islands, right? And I stayed there until the ship decided to come in. So I jump in my car and I go down to the port because I want to see whether they behave the way we do. Well, Cayman Islands is a little joke to the Bahamas in terms of size and all that. The ship is there and nothing happened on the ship. Everybody off that ship, mixing with the Communion, whatever we call them, and they, in the restaurants, they were in the shows, because the ship closed. In the Bahamas, it used to be that way. You had 12 and 13 nightclubs on Bay Street. We had about 60-something nightclubs running, given one night in this country. Today,
we have to force them to be closed when they're in the harbor.
Yes, we have to force them, Mr. Jones, because that is revenue, that's employment. And don't leave there to go to Blue Lagoon. What happened to the taxi drivers? And I'm saying, if we're talking about new revenue stream, and this is coming out of this group, the group that, and we get quite a bit of them. But 29 unions are involved. So we can make that, Mr. Jones, available to you. And I know you will help to publicize it to the public as you have been doing. Actually, we should name your station. We should name your station the Worker Station, because you have been good to us for the last 27 years, if not longer. And I'm the kind of fellow I like to call a spade a spade. Yeah. I don't have no axe to grind with nobody. You know? So I'm saying to you, Fred and Mr. Lightbourne, maybe when we meet at the TUC board meeting again, I'm going to ask you to, Sloan, to put a resolution on the floor.
Be careful now, you're on the air.
No, I know I'm talking to you here.
Yeah.
No, because you have been very, no, we understand you're a journalist. We understand you got to be a journalist. A journalist put tough questions to you to get the information out to the public. But you have been always available for the working people. And so I'm going to ask my colleagues to do that. And I can assure you that we will seriously consider that and bring back a positive position that Wendell Jones, a man who came from zero, got a network.
And multiple zeros by
Yes,
now.
okay? From zero, this man is now somebody that has been educating, entertaining, and informing this public. So we are duty-bound to do that. So COVID is not only historical, it will be historical as well to name your station the Working People Station.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Ferguson. You're very kind. Thank you for your kind remarks. Thank you for being here today. And we wish the Bahamas Trade Union Congress all the best during this very difficult period. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you for watching and listening to our program. Good evening, everyone.